Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to ancient China, to a time of marble lions, mysterious scrolls, and an emperor who genuinely believed that books were more dangerous than ghosts. You'll be walking in soft sandals beside the first emperor himself, Qin Shi Huang. He's got a palace full of secrets, a suspicious attitude toward poetry, and a habit of commissioning life-sized statues just to prove a point. This journey will be strange, quiet, and filled with the kind of rules that don't make a lot of sense unless you've already memorized Confucian etiquette backward. And even then, you probably wouldn't survive this experience unless you had a full-time scribe, a fake beard, and the agility of a tea house cat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, comment your location and the local time where you are. It's oddly fun to see who else is drifting into dynasties around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky above Xianyang feels heavy, like it's trying to rain but hasn't quite made up its mind. You're standing at the edge of the Imperial Garden, a place they say was designed not for beauty, but for quiet intimidation. The path beneath your feet is a tidy line of polished black stone, slick with mist and just warm enough to remind you that the day ended recently. Bamboo rustles in the breeze. Somewhere behind you, a gong sounds with an echo that keeps echoing longer than you think it should. You're not alone. Flanking the path on both sides are towering stone figures, generals, guards, mythical beasts, and one very stern-looking calligrapher. Their faces are detailed enough to suggest that someone, somewhere, had a long and petty grudge. One of them has a mole the size of a steamed bun. These are the emperor's statues. Some say they're modeled after real people. Others whisper that they were made to frighten ghosts away, because nothing unsettles a spirit more than excellent posture and eyebrows carved from granite. You pass one that seems to watch you, its head slightly tilted like it's about to critique your walking stance. A little further along, a statue of a woman holds a scroll and looks mildly disappointed in you, like a disappointed librarian from 220 BCE. And there, under a silk-draped canopy that ripples gently in the breeze, sits the man himself. Qin Shi Huang is wearing robes so dark they seem to absorb light. Gold embroidery winds across his sleeves in the shape of dragons that look like they're trying to sneak off the fabric. His hair is pinned high, his gaze low, and he's sharpening a brush with the same concentration most people reserve for planning a surprise attack. He doesn't look up when you approach. He simply speaks. "They're watching you," he murmurs, motioning to the statues. "But don't worry. They're only judging your thoughts." You offer a polite nod, which he doesn't return. "I had a dream last night," he continues, as if you're a long-lost advisor. "There was a man with ink on his teeth trying to explain morality while floating 3 inches above the ground. I woke up and banned metaphors for the rest of the week." He finally glances your way. His eyes are dark and clear like 2 cups of tea that haven't been stirred yet. You're not entirely sure if he's joking. "Come," he says, standing up. "I'll show you where the thinkers used to sit." Before they started getting clever, you follow him down a garden path lined with bonsai trees, each one trimmed into the shape of a single Chinese character. Most are words like loyalty and order. One seems to spell out maybe, but it's been pruned into silence. As you walk, Qin gestures toward a statue of a man with a scroll tucked under one arm and a duck under the other. "This one wrote an essay on the virtues of flexibility," the emperor says. He's now immortalized holding his dinner. The air is warm and still, except for a few brave crickets tuning up somewhere near the koi pond. A low fog has settled in the garden now, curling around the base of the statues like silk unraveling. At the center of the garden, there's a square stone table with exactly 4 stools, each carved from a different kind of stone: jade, marble, obsidian, and something that might be fossilized regret. Qin sits down and motions for you to join him. "You know why I don't fear ghosts?" He asks, resting his hands on the table. You shake your head. "Ghosts don't publish essays," he says, They don't question policies, they don't organize public debates on the ethics of shoe taxation. He leans in slightly. But scholars, they multiply like mold. You give them a library and they'll fill it with thoughts. He leans back, then chuckles quietly to himself. The worst part, he adds, is that sometimes they're right. You glance around at the watching statues, the still pond, the careful garden. The silence here is deep, the kind that's not empty, but full of things unsaid. Historians still wonder if the emperor truly believed these stone generals could protect him from rebellious philosophies, or if he simply liked the symmetry of it all. Either way, he stands again and begins walking toward a long corridor lined with lanterns that never seem to flicker. He doesn't say anything this time. He just walks slowly, hands behind his back, the mist parting before him like it knows better than to ask questions. You follow. The statues do not, but you still feel their eyes. You follow the emperor into the corridor, where the stone garden gives way to smooth walls and dim light. The air shifts. It's cooler here, drier somehow, as if the building itself doesn't fully approve of humidity. Lanterns line the hallway, their warm glow flickering ever so slightly. Even though there's no draft, the corridor bends just a little. Not a sharp turn, more like a hallway that changed its mind halfway through being built. Qin walks ahead of you with deliberate calm, each step as evenly spaced as characters on a scroll. His robes trail just above the ground, silent and stately. You try to match his pace, but it feels like walking beside someone who thinks in full paragraphs. The walls here are made of dark, lacquered wood. Every few feet, there's a carved panel, landscapes, mountains, sometimes clouds. You pause by one with a crane standing beside a scroll. The crane looks proud of itself. The scroll looks like it's trying to escape. The emperor stops without warning and gestures at the wall. Right here, he says, tapping a knuckle on the panel. This is where a minister once whispered that too many laws spoil the soup. That night, the wall echoed his words 3 times. He tilts his head. I didn't punish him. I punished the soup. You blink. He walks on. The corridor feels watched, not in a spooky way, more like how a cat watches you when it knows something you don't. A little judgmental, very quiet, possibly amused. At one point the floor creaks just once, loud enough to make you flinch. Qin pauses and smiles faintly. They say the floorboards were installed to creak at strategic moments. It encourages honesty. Another few steps and the walls begin to change. Less decoration now, more words. Delicate calligraphy is painted onto the panels in flowing black strokes. You recognize symbols for peace, obedience, rice, and, somewhat alarmingly, quiet mouth. You stop in front of a large scroll framed behind polished glass. The characters are bold, almost too confident, like they're daring you to mispronounce them. Essay on proper footwear etiquette during public debate, Qin explains, sounding only mildly annoyed. Apparently, there was an incident where 2 scholars disagreed about shoe types, and it turned into a full argument about the meaning of truth. He sighs. Eventually, I ruled that anyone debating must wear identical sandals to avoid symbolic confusion. He seems proud of that one. It's easy to get lost in this hallway, not because it twists, but because time feels funny here. You pass a bench shaped like a brush stroke and realize you've been walking for longer than you thought. The emperor pauses again. This hallway wasn't always here, he says softly. I had it added after someone left a poem in my teacup, a tiny scroll, floating, about freedom. He doesn't elaborate. Instead, he reaches into his sleeve and pulls out a folded silk handkerchief. With careful fingers, he lays it flat against the wall. It's blank. Sometimes, he says, when I press this here, the wall gives me answers. You nod like that makes perfect sense. He waits. The wall remains a wall. Well, he says, folding it back up, perhaps it's shy tonight. As you continue walking, you hear it. A sound you didn't notice before. It's not footsteps, not breathing, not whispering exactly. It's repetition, like a word being thought over and over just past the edge of hearing. You glance sideways at the walls. Nothing moves. Historians still argue, Qin says suddenly, about whether this corridor was built for acoustics or for paranoia. He says this casually, like one might mention a preference for green tea over black. Some believe the curves encourage reflection. He continues. Others think the slight slope affects memory. You pause and realize the hallway does seem to tilt just a little, as though it's rising up ever so slightly, demanding your posture improve, and you do straighten up, just a bit. Because if there's one thing this place doesn't tolerate, it's slouching. The Emperor stops at a set of double doors. They're tall, with handles shaped like dragons who appear to be trying to avoid eye contact. He turns to you. This is the Hall of Measured Thought, he says. He doesn't open the doors. Once it was filled with advisors, each allowed precisely 42 words per day. You raise an eyebrow. Some chose to whisper their words in the morning. Others saved them until sunset. One forgot to use any for 3 weeks. He was promoted. He turns away from the door. No one speaks in there now. I keep it sealed to preserve the silence. As you walk on, your feet begin to echo again. This time, the sound feels less accusatory. Maybe the hallway's warming up to you, or maybe you're just getting used to being observed by architectural judgment. The corridor ends at a rounded doorway carved with images of quills and scrolls locked in combat. Literal swords vs. words. One scroll appears to be winning by sheer length. Qin stops. I built this palace to protect my people, he says, from enemies, from chaos, and from too many footnotes. He sighs again, one of those royal sighs that contains decades of annotated frustration. Then quieter, but mostly from doubt. You don't respond. The silence between you is comfortable now. It feels padded, like the hallway itself has stopped eavesdropping for just a moment. The Emperor gives a faint nod toward the next chamber. There's something I want you to see, he says. It's ridiculous, but so is history. And with that, he steps through the arched doorway. The walls behind you stay exactly where they are, but you're almost certain one of them just sighed. The chamber you step into is warmer than the hallway, filled with the soft smell of aged parchment and something vaguely herbal, like someone once spilled tea on a scroll, and no one had the heart to clean it up. The floor is a gleaming lattice of polished wood, and your footsteps now make the sound of applause at a poetry reading. If that applause were politely restrained and wearing silk gloves, at the center of the room is a small stage. Not raised, but framed, outlined in smooth jade tiles like a performance space that forgot to be dramatic. Cushions are arranged in semicircles, each embroidered with images of brush pens and owls. A few still have ink stains. One seems to be smoldering slightly, but no one seems to mind. Qin strides toward a nearby display cabinet and taps the glass. Inside, resting on a satin pillow, is a bronze writing brush with a crack down the middle. This, he says, was the weapon of choice for one of my court poets. He gestures to the cushions. You sit. The air settles around you like a thick robe. There was a time, he begins, when my court held poetry competitions every full moon. His tone implies he didn't approve. One evening, a young man from the southern provinces stood up and performed a series of verses comparing government policy to soup. He pauses. It was. Clever, you wait. He is now in charge of grain distribution, very far away. He writes poetry about barley now. He settles onto a cushion beside you, his robes folding into tidy layers like obedient clouds. The cushions begin to vibrate slightly. No, that's just someone tuning a stringed instrument in the far corner. You hadn't noticed the musician before. He's sitting cross-legged, plucking a qin with the kind of focus usually reserved for diffusing traps. He's our last approved accompaniment, Qin says quietly. Instrumental only, lyrics caused complications. A door creaks. You turn. A woman enters, dressed in long robes the color of faded ink. Her hair is pinned with delicate scroll-shaped clips. She bows to the Emperor, then begins to recite. Her voice is clear, musical, but cautious. Every syllable lands like it was double-checked by a minister of metaphor. The poem is about river reeds, also loyalty, possibly dumplings. It's hard to tell. You glance at Qin. He's nodding slightly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. She's good, he murmurs. Very few abstract nouns. When she finishes, the room doesn't erupt into applause, it exhales. The silence is thick, reverent, and slightly relieved. She once used the word maybe, Qin tells you, eyes still on the stage, just once. We debated the implications for 2 weeks. He turns toward you now. Poetry, he says, is dangerous because it doesn't always end where it starts. A metaphor slips, a simile stumbles, and suddenly you have rebellion disguised as river imagery. He frowns, or worse, hope. You nod slowly, which seems safest. He stands again and paces toward the musician, who plucks a single note in response. I required all poets to wear ceremonial armor after that soup incident, Qin continues. We didn't want blood, but bruised egos are difficult to silence. You follow him toward a tapestry hanging behind the musician. It's huge, woven in fine silk threads, depicting what looks like a poetry contest in progress. Judges hold scrolls. Performers bow deeply. One in the back appears to be fainting into a calligraphy basket. Historians still debate whether the armor rule was real. Qin says, gesturing toward the tapestry. Some think it was metaphorical. I say, if a metaphor can be worn, it's probably safer. He pauses, then adds, also, they looked excellent, intimidating. It's hard to critique a poem when the poet is wearing shoulder plates. You try to picture it, a gentle ode to falling leaves, recited by someone who looks like they just marched in from battle. You can't help but smile, he notices. Ah, see, it's absurd, but absurdity makes people pay attention. He waves a hand toward a locked chest in the corner. That box contains banned stanzas. Clever ones, subtle. They twisted meanings just enough to sound loyal while suggesting otherwise. You ever read a poem that insults you without technically saying anything unkind? You think of a few restaurant reviews. You nod. Qin moves closer to the chest and sighs. There was one line, what was it? A tree cannot grow tall in a square pot. He looks at you. Do you see the problem? You hesitate. Ooh, he lifts a brow. Exactly. He walks back to the center of the room, then settles down again on the jade-lined stage floor. The poets still send me things, discreetly. A haiku sewn into a robe hem, an ode hidden in an invoice. I confiscate most of them. You hear a faint rustle behind one of the curtains, maybe a breeze. Maybe another poet trying to blend in with the upholstery. He continues more quietly now. There's something slippery about words. A sword can be blocked, a poem can just keep meaning things. You both sit for a while, letting the string instrument fill the silence like steam rising from a teacup. Eventually, he says, they say the pen is mightier than the sword. He gives a small shrug. So I gave my poets helmets. One of the embroidered cushions nearby is stitched with a haiku. You recognize the characters for wind, silence, and, probably taxes. You wonder who wrote it, and if they're still writing. Or if they've been reassigned to logistics like the soup poet. The musician plucks one last note, low and slow. The chamber dims just a little, as if it's grown sleepy with memory. Qin stands, stretches slightly, and gestures toward another door, this one small, wooden, and plainly carved. Come, he says softly. I want to show you the scrolls that survived. The plain wooden door creaks open with a sound like someone exhaling after a long nap. It leads into a hallway that doesn't bother with grandeur. No lanterns shaped like dragons here, just square sconces, soft yellow light, and walls that smell faintly of cedar and ink. No, wait. Ink and something else. Possibly pickled plum. You follow Qin Shi Huang down a narrow set of stone steps. The air cools with each step, curling into your sleeves like it's trying to read your thoughts. There's a distinct hush here, the kind of quiet usually reserved for libraries, sacred rituals, and overstuffed linen closets. This wing, Qin says softly, was meant for destruction. He doesn't say it ominously. Just matter of fact, like someone explaining that, yes, the guest bedroom does double as a controlled burn zone for historical documentation. At the bottom of the steps, the hallway ends in a door that looks like it's never quite been allowed to relax. Heavy wood. Iron lock. Hinges that squeak in Morse code. Qin reaches into his sleeve, retrieves a key made from bone. Yes, actual bone, probably from someone who once questioned the usefulness of shelf space, and unlocks the door with a satisfying click. Inside, you're met with rows upon rows of shelves. They aren't quite straight, some lean. Others look like they were installed by someone with strong opinions but poor spatial reasoning. A few are wedged at odd angles, as if the scrolls inside them didn't want to get too cozy with their neighbors. You step in carefully. This, Qin says, is the room of the unburned. He doesn't elaborate. You walk slowly down the first aisle. Scrolls are tucked in labeled cubbies. Most of the labels are faded or have been corrected with new ink in slightly messier handwriting. One tag simply reads, "Recipes may be important." You pull that one gently. It's a scroll on how to stew silkworms with ginger for medicinal focus. There's a marginal note next to one ingredient that just says "Nope." Qin leans over your shoulder. That one was smuggled in by a monk who thought enlightenment could be eaten. He smiles faintly. He wasn't entirely wrong. You continue browsing. The next cubby contains a scroll titled "Proper Ways to Greet a Goose in Spring." Beneath that, list of acceptable courtyard shapes revised, and then 12 emotional benefits of folding laundry thoughtfully. These weren't destroyed. Qin explains, because they confused the inspectors. He walks over to a shelf near the back, runs a finger along the edge of a particularly dusty scroll, and sneezes. The sound echoes oddly. Like the walls themselves weren't expecting a sneeze and are now unsure how to process it. He gestures to a basket near your feet. That, he says, is the Scrolls of Useless Measurements collection. You peek inside. One reads, "How to measure a courtyard breeze using only noodles." Another claims to calculate happiness by counting roof tiles. One just has a drawing of a turtle wearing glasses. These were submitted during the Great Intellectual Diversion Project, Qin says with an exasperated tone. I asked the scholars to focus on practical topics. They responded with irony. He gives the basket a nudge with his foot. I kept them, just in case they accidentally made sense one day. You move on to a nearby shelf labeled "Rejected Philosophy." The scrolls here are unusually neat, tied with red ribbons and tagged with what appear to be emotional disclaimers. One title catches your eye, a treatise on how to complain without actually complaining. Qin notices. I almost approved that one, he admits. But then the footnotes got smug. He walks with you through the aisles, pointing occasionally. This section, he says, is for scrolls too ridiculous to burn. That one there contains a story about a fish who opens a tea shop. You tilt your head. It's actually quite moving, he adds. You stop by a cubby with no label. Inside are just two scrolls, one blank, one partially written in invisible ink that reveals itself in the warm light. Qin looks at them for a moment. These were hidden by a young archivist who believed no scroll deserved to die without at least being read once. He glances at you. They say he copied his favorite texts by moonlight and stored them in clay pots. You wonder if the archivist survived, or if he became part of the clay collection himself. Historians still debate whether this room existed because of imperial mercy, disorganization, or because even the emperor's own censors couldn't agree on what counted as threatening content. Some argue it was a mistake. Others think it was a quiet rebellion with filing cabinets. Qin moves toward a small writing desk tucked in the corner, where a scroll lies open beside a half-dried ink stone and a brush with a frayed tip. This, he says, was the last scroll I ever read aloud in full. You glance at the scroll. The characters are simple, tidy, and somewhat playful. It appears to be a list of things the author is grateful for, including shade on a hot day, conversations that pause but don't end, and bread that surprises you. You smile. I banned it, Qin says. It made me too reflective. He sounds only mildly regretful. Emperors don't have time to be sentimental. That's how you end up approving metaphorical goose poems. He sits down at the desk and lightly taps the ink stone with one finger. Sometimes I come here to read the things I shouldn't have read, he admits. They make me uncomfortable, but also curious. The scroll curls slightly under the soft lantern light. You can smell the old ink, spiced, a little musty but alive. Somewhere near the far shelf, something shifts, just a bit. Maybe a breeze, maybe an idea. Qin stands again, slower this time. He doesn't say anything as he walks toward the door. He simply rests a hand on the frame before glancing back. Come, he says, let's meet the man who promised me immortality. You hesitate for a heartbeat, then follow. The scroll behind you uncurls just a little more. As if it's not done being read. The corridor narrows again as you follow Qin Shi Huang through a low, winding hallway that smells like dried herbs and mild regret. The walls are closer here, lined with shelves too small for scrolls and too large for comfort. One niche holds what appears to be a jar of pickled radish labeled Memory Enhancer. Another features a dried gourd wearing spectacles. The Emperor says nothing at first. His pace slows. He seems to be savoring something in the silence, like a man approaching a room that's half museum, half inside joke. Eventually, he stops in front of a beaded curtain made of carved jade coins. He pushes it aside and steps into a chamber lit with floating oil lamps that bob slightly in the still air, as if they, too, are unsure about what comes next. This is not a grand alchemy lab. It's more like a forgotten apothecary, and a hobbyist's garage had an enthusiastic but poorly planned child. Shelves sag under the weight of ceramic pots labeled with delightful ambiguity. Elixirish, maybe not poison, immortalish tea, and one simply marked no. Bundles of dried roots hang from the rafters. A tiny gong dangles near the entrance, wrapped in cobwebs and mystery. Qin walks to a table at the center, its surface covered in delicate glass flasks, chipped teacups, and a half-carved statue of a goat with unusually long eyelashes. This, the Emperor announces, was the last workspace of Zhu Fu. He says the name as if it should mean something to you. You wait. He was my court alchemist, Qin explains. Promised me immortality, claimed to have a map drawn by the moon herself. You tilt your head. Qin leans in, lowering his voice. He also once mistook fermented onions for divine pearls. He gestures to a large jar in the corner that bubbles slightly. That, he adds, is what he left behind, along with a scroll written in lemon juice and several missing spoons. You approach a small cabinet, open just enough to reveal an uncomfortably large feather quill, a collection of miniature clay figurines shaped like frogs, and what appears to be a note reading, "Back in 100 years, don't touch my goose." Qin folds his arms. I gave him ships, you know, real ones. With sails and crews. Told him to sail east and find Pinglai, the legendary island of the immortals. He sighs. He took the fleet, 3 dancers and an unusual number of paper lanterns. You glance around. Did he return? Qin shakes his head slowly. No. Though someone once claimed they saw him in a fishing village, selling herbal shampoo and muttering about sea dragons. He walks toward a shelf lined with scrolls that look suspiciously like grocery lists. One of them is titled, 7 Ways to Pretend Something is Working Even When It Definitely Isn't. Another reads, The Proper Temperature for Disguising Desperation. He believed, Qin continues, that immortality could be brewed. He picks up a small bottle filled with what looks like sparkly vinegar. I tasted this once. My tongue itched for a week. You try not to grimace. Historians still debate whether Zhu Fu truly believed in his mission, Qin says. Some think he fled with the ships, others think he actually found something and decided not to share. He sets the bottle down gently, like it might explode if startled. And some, he adds with a raised brow, believe he became immortal and lives quietly on an island, writing Hakis about garlic. You peer into a glass vial. The liquid inside swirls like ink dropped into tea. You're not sure if it's magical or just expired. The Emperor moves to a dusty journal laid open on the counter. The page reads, Test hash 47 cloudberry rice wine, essence of moonlight, 1 suspicious peach. Status glowed briefly, then exploded. He taps the page. He tried everything, Qin murmurs. Herbs, stones, animal parts, poetry. He pauses. Yes, he once insisted that a perfectly structured limerick could delay aging. You consider asking for an example, but think better of it. You wander further into the chamber, past a curtain of dried kelp and into a side room lit only by the flicker of a single oil lamp. There's a tub in the center, small, iron, stained with something metallic. He called it the Transfiguration Bath, Qin says. Sat in it every 3rd Thursday while humming to plants. You look at the tub again. It does not look like it contains wisdom. It looks like it contains regret and possibly anchovy broth. Did it work, you ask? Qin shrugs. He claimed he once turned into a cloud for 8 seconds. You nod slowly. That could have been steam, you offer gently. Yes, Qin agrees, but he did smell remarkably like camphor afterward. The air shifts slightly. One of the jars on the top shelf makes a gurgling sound, like a memory bubbling up from too far down. Qin walks back to the center of the room and lifts a small, sealed box. He opens it carefully. Inside is a single note, written in tight, careful script. It reads, "The secret to immortality is to be needed and never found." You and Qin look at it in silence. After a while, he closes the box. "I don't know if he was mocking me," the Emperor says quietly, "or protecting me from something worse." You watch him for a moment. The room seems to settle then, as if it's given up trying to impress you. You take one last look at the mismatched jars, the burned notes, the basket of dried plum rinds, and the tiny statue of a rabbit in a cape. Then you follow Qin out of the chamber, back through the jade curtain, back into the hallway. The air feels cooler now, a little sharper. The Emperor turns slightly, a rare glimmer in his eye. "Come," he says, "let's lie down and talk about what you're allowed to dream." You're led into a quiet wing of the palace that smells faintly of starched linen, rice paper, and something floral you can't quite place. Maybe jasmine, maybe powdered restraint. The walls here are pale and plain, the floors smooth and cool beneath your feet. The whole space has the energy of a very dignified nap. Qin walks ahead, his robe swishing like an annoyed breeze. His steps are slower now, almost ceremonial. You begin to suspect you're entering sacred territory, and then you see it, a row of beds. Low to the ground, with woven reed mats, lacquered headrests, and soft silk covers in pale blue and cream. Each bed has a small table beside it. Each table holds a single object, a folded scroll, a cup of warm water, and, most curiously, a delicately embroidered pillow. Qin stops at the nearest bed and lifts the pillow. It's heavier than it looks. He tosses it to you, you catch it. Just barely. It's not filled with feathers. It's filled with rules, he says. Literal ones. You blink. He gestures toward the stitching. And sure enough, woven into the silk are tiny, perfectly legible characters. You read aloud. Approved dream topics. Agricultural success, efficient drainage, proper filial behavior, the soothing sound of administrative compliance. You look up. Seriously, Qin nods. I once had a minister dream about flying. When he awoke, he submitted a proposal to build wings. We had to hold a very long meeting. He walks down the row, hands clasped behind his back. Dreams, like poems, are unpredictable, but unlike poems, you can't exile a dream once it's loose. He stops beside another bed, this one larger, the pillow even more ornate. "This was mine," he says. "I had a separate dream pillow for each season. Summer dreams were limited to fishing metaphors and good harvests." You sit slowly on one of the beds. It's comfortable in the way that makes you suspicious something philosophical is about to happen. Qin sits across from you. "There were laws," he says, "about what dreams could be spoken aloud." You wait. Joyful dreams were permitted only during feast months. Dreams about change had to be written down and submitted for review. He pauses. Nightmares, he adds, were considered selfish. They interrupted the harmony of sleep. You glance at the pillow again. The embroidery now reads, "Please avoid imagery involving rebellion, elevation, or doors opening without permission." You lie back just a little, your head resting on the edge of the pillow. It's firm, weirdly comforting, like being gently judged by a very polite librarian. "There was one scholar," Qin says, "who claimed he dreamed of a river reversing course." He leans forward. "He was reassigned to aqueduct maintenance." You chuckle. "He doesn't. I'm serious," he says. "Dreams are slippery. They blur the lines. I once dreamed I was a mountain. I refused to move for an entire day. My staff had to conduct court around my chair." You try to picture it. It's surprisingly easy. Historians still wonder, he continues, whether my so-called dream laws were written or simply implied. Some claim I issued them in sleep and forgot by breakfast. You glance around the room. It's soft here, almost womb-like. The only sound is the faint whisper of the fabric walls shifting with the breeze. Qin rises and opens a nearby cabinet. Inside are scrolls labeled with things like dream interpretation for civil servants, seasonal bedtime conduct, and one titled simply, "What Not to Imagine." He pulls out a scroll and tosses it onto the bed beside you. "The seal is broken. I caught a poet once," he says. "Writing dream poems on behalf of others. Said it was safer that way." He pauses. "I commissioned 3. He walks toward the window, looks out at the darkened sky. "Sometimes I dream of silence," he says. "Not absence, just peace. You wonder if that's allowed. You decide not to ask." A breeze lifts one of the sheer curtains, revealing a moonlit view of a courtyard. Stone lanterns line the path below, casting soft light on a small pond where koi drift like sleepy punctuation marks. You notice one last pillow at the end of the row. It's embroidered with only 2 characters. "Unwritten dreams," you point to it. "What about that one?" Qin doesn't turn around. "That pillow is for people who dream without realizing it." You blink. It hasn't been used in years. You both sit in silence again, the room breathing softly around you. It feels like the kind of place where questions get tired before they are asked. Eventually, Qin speaks again. "I tried to ban chaos," he says. "I tried to build walls around thought, but dreams," he trails off. "Dreams are walls that grow doors." He walks toward the exit, brushing his fingers along one of the beds as he passes. "Come," he says. "It's time to meet the fire." You stand. The dream pillows remain behind, fluffed, embroidered, and suspiciously quiet. The hallway leading to the fire chamber is brighter than the rest of the palace. Not warm exactly, but brighter. Like the kind of light people pretend is natural but definitely isn't. It flickers just slightly, casting long shadows that trail behind you like gossip. Qin walks with purpose now. No detours. No side glances at dream pillows or suspicious scrolls. His pace is brisk but not rushed like someone who's already memorized what they're about to destroy. At the end of the corridor, a large bronze door waits. It's heavy. Unapologetically so. The handles are shaped like phoenixes holding scrolls in their beaks. One of the scrolls is on fire. The other looks like it's thinking about it. The Emperor pauses. "This is the Chamber of Erasure," he says. Again, no drama in his tone, just a quiet admission. Like someone naming a pet that keeps eating the curtains. He opens the door with both hands. It swings inward, creaking dramatically. Clearly the door was waiting for this moment to show off. Inside is a wide stone chamber. In the center, a shallow fire pit glows softly, its flames not crackling but purring like a very focused cat. The scent in the air is unexpected. Sandalwood, dried plum, and something faintly nostalgic, like old paper you weren't supposed to touch. Scrolls are stacked neatly along the walls. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each bundle is tied with a red cord and labeled in black ink. Some labels read, "Overly philosophical," others, "Mildly questionable in winter." A large chart hangs beside the pit titled, "Approved Burning Schedule." Monday, Overexplained Ethics. Tuesday, Time Travel Theories. Wednesday, Dream-Inspired Recipes. Thursday, everything else with supervisor approval. You step closer. The fire doesn't hiss, it hums. The flames are low, steady, and oddly polite. Qin kneels beside the pit and selects a scroll from a nearby basket. He holds it up without reading it. "This one," he says, "contains a metaphor about ducks." He tosses it gently into the fire. The scroll disappears with a soft F-whump. The fire briefly glows pink. You blink. "Was the metaphor dangerous?" Qin shrugs. "It implied that obedience is for the flightless." You sit beside him on a smooth stone bench. It's surprisingly warm. "You read them first?" you ask. "Sometimes," he replies. "Sometimes I just look at the title and guess the mood." You scan the room. More scrolls, some stacked haphazardly, some stored with obsessive precision. One pile is labeled, "Unclear Purpose, Clear Tone." He lifts another scroll and passes it to you. It's labeled, "The Sky is Not a Ceiling." You glance at him. He nods solemnly. "Too optimistic." You gently place it into the fire. The flames turn briefly blue, then settle again. Nearby, a table holds a large ledger labeled, "Burn Records." You peek inside. Each entry includes the scroll title, date burned, flame color, and a column called Emotional Aftertaste. One entry reads title, Leaves that don't obey the wind flame, pale green emotion, mild rebellion with notes of melancholy Qin sees you reading. I had a poet once who tried to write exclusively in citrus metaphors, claimed it kept his ideas fresh. He tosses another scroll into the fire. It smells faintly of lemon zest. Historians still argue whether I burned ideas for control, he says, or whether I was simply allergic to ambiguity. He leans back, resting his elbows on the bench behind him. Some think I feared knowledge, but it's not knowledge I feared, it's when knowledge gets smug. You look toward a scroll leaning against the wall, labeled in thick, almost defiant handwriting, on the importance of knowing when to stop talking. It's tied with an extra knot, you chuckle. Burn that one, he raises a brow. No, I framed it. He gestures toward a glass case on the far wall. Sure enough, the scroll is there, mounted in silk, lit from above like a relic. Ironic scrolls are my weakness, he admits. You both watch the flames for a while, they're gentle. Tidy, professional, you wonder how many ideas were lost here, and how many were saved by accident. There's a rumor, Qin tells you, about a scroll so boring no one read it, and it accidentally survived every purge. It's about the ideal shape of storage jars, he says. And yet somehow, buried in the footnotes, is a revolutionary theory about land ownership. You glance toward the pile labeled miscellaneous utensils. It suddenly feels more rebellious than you expected. A scroll tumbles off the edge, you both stare, neither of you picks it up. It can wait, Qin says, and for once you agree. The fire crackles softly. The bench is warm. The scrolls rustle in the quiet, like they're whispering to each other when no one's looking. Then Qin rises and brushes off his sleeves. There's something I want to show you, he says. The place where scholars were reassigned. He doesn't say exiled, he doesn't say punished, he just says reassigned. You follow. Behind you, the fire glows amber and hums one last low note, like a lullaby made of smoke. The corridor that follows is outdoors again, though it doesn't quite feel like the outside world. High stone walls line either side of a narrow path, their surfaces covered in delicate moss and the occasional etching of a proverb that probably didn't pass review. Moonlight spills in from above, soft and silver, draping everything in that peaceful, washed-out glow reserved for quiet regrets and garden statues. You walk in step with the Emperor. He's quieter now, not somber exactly, just remembering. You pass a water basin carved from a single block of jade. Floating inside are 6 perfectly round stones, each painted with a character. Together they read, "Speak less, garden more." You raise an eyebrow, Qin nods without looking at you. That used to be the unofficial motto here. He stops in front of a small wooden gate, unadorned except for a brass plate labeled, "The Tranquil Thinking and Landscaping Collective, formerly the Department of Reasonably Inconvenient Philosophies." He pushes it open. You step into the most peaceful little garden you've ever seen. Gravel paths curl gently between flowering trees, each labeled with tags like "thinks too much" and "strong opinions on grain taxes." A tiny footbridge spans a shallow koi pond, its surface dotted with lily pads arranged in mathematically impossible symmetry. There's a bench under a plum tree. A hat rests on it. No one is sitting there. At first it just seems like a lovely, well-tended garden, then you begin to notice the details. A row of bamboo flutes sits silently on a stone shelf, each etched with footnotes. A wind chime made of parchment sways in the breeze, though it makes no sound. Several stepping stones are inscribed with logical arguments that all end in the word probably. And near the center, there's a circle of smooth chairs carved from marble. Each one holds a teacup. Each cup is full. Qin approaches slowly. He doesn't sit. "This," he says, "was where I sent the most insistent thinkers." He gestures to the teacups. "We told the public they were being rewarded with extended reflection time." You glance around. Were they? Qin shrugs. "Define reward." You walk past a tiny bonsai tree shaped like a question mark. A placard beside it reads, "Do not prune without permission." Beneath that, also, "Do not philosophize about pruning." You sit on one of the empty chairs. The teacup is warm, fragrant, possibly oolong, possibly rebellion in liquid form. They weren't prisoners, Qin says. They could speak, they could walk the garden, they just weren't allowed to publish. You pause. At all, not even Hakis, he says, slightly grimacing. He points to a stone wall nearby, barely visible behind a hedge. Carved across it is a quiet inscription. Some thoughts are too delicate for scrolls. You ask the obvious question, did they ever leave? He's already shaking his head. One tried, he says. Left behind a poem hidden under a rock. It rhymed too well. We kept it. He walks to the koi pond and squats beside it. The fish lazily swirl near him like they know he wrote the rules of the garden. Historians still debate whether this place was exile or refuge, he says. Some claim I silenced them, others say I gave them peace. You study the path, the perfectly swept stones, the silent chimes. One small pine tree is covered in ribbons, each with a single word, almost, if, still, because you wonder if the philosophers tied them there or if the garden did it for them. There was one man, Qin continues, who wrote essays in the sand each morning and erased them with his foot. He picks up a pebble and tosses it into the pond. I asked him why he did it. He said, because I only needed to write it once. You don't speak, neither does he. The garden is very good at quiet. Eventually, you rise and wander to a tiny stone archway at the back. A wooden sign above it reads, "Side thoughts welcome. Enter with intention." You glance back. Qin nods. You duck through the arch and find yourself in a miniature grove of bamboo. Paper lanterns hang from the stalks, unlit but softly swaying. Each lantern has a name on it, just a single name, no titles, no accusations. You reach out and tap one. It spins once lazily and the name disappears. Qin speaks from behind you. They say, he murmurs, if the name vanishes, the thought it held is finally at peace. You both stand there for a moment, the breeze lifting the edge of your sleeve. A garden bell chimes. No one is near it. Qin turns. Come, he says. We're not done yet. He heads back toward the path, past the plum tree, past the hat that still waits on the bench. You glance around one more time. The teacups stay full. The garden stays still. And the wind carries the quiet away like a very well-written goodbye. The garden gives way to stone again. Wider paving this time, laid in large flat slabs that hum gently beneath your footsteps, like they remember every person who's ever walked on them. You can smell dust and sun-warmed rock, even though the moon is the only thing watching now. The path stretches forward, rising slowly toward a distant hill. At the summit, you see a familiar curve, the jagged silhouette of the Great Wall. Qin says nothing for a while. He just walks, you follow. Wind brushes past, soft and dry. It smells faintly of clay, charcoal, and something toasted, possibly sesame, possibly exhaustion. As you climb, the ground grows uneven. The paving turns to packed dirt and gravel, the occasional embedded tile marked with a single character. Stop. Think. Breathe. You begin to suspect the tiles are trying to talk you out of the hike. At the top of the slope, the wall finally comes into full view. Massive, winding, impossible not to stare at. It snakes across the ridgeline like a stubborn sentence, unfinished, unpunctuated, and extremely confident in its length. You approach the nearest guard tower, which is much less military fortress and much more polite tea house with commitment issues. There are tea tables. You weren't expecting tea tables. One sits just inside the tower archway, carved from pale wood and still holding 4 clay cups, each with a small, dried-up lemon wedge floating sadly inside. A teapot rests beside them, cracked but proud. Qin gestures toward it. Every mile, he says. I ordered a tea break station. You stare at him. Every mile, he nods, entirely serious. Building a wall is hard. Coordinating breaks is harder. You glance toward the next tower down the wall. It's far, but not impossibly so. You can just make out another table there, set with cups. Possibly napkins, possibly poetry. They weren't just tea breaks, he adds. They were pauses for perspective. He walks over to the table and picks up a scroll tucked beneath it. Each station had a poem, he explains, unrolling the scroll with care. Short, simple. Mostly instructions disguised as reflections. He reads aloud, rest the hands that carry weight, and let the thoughts not replicate. The stone is placed, the tea is warm, resist the urge to build a storm. He shrugs. We hired a haiku specialist. You sit on the edge of the wall, feet dangling above the drop. The view is breathtaking. The countryside below is silver and quiet. The stars above twinkle like they, too, are trying to stay awake for the ending. A gust of wind rattles the cups. Qin sits beside you, resting his hands on his knees. Some believed I built this wall to keep enemies out, he says. Others believed I built it to keep ideas in, he pauses. I'm not sure they were wrong. You watch a lantern flicker in the next tower, just one, a dim pulse in the dark. There was a worker, Qin says suddenly, who painted one poem on every cup. You turn to him. He signed them with a drawing of a snail, never his name, just the snail. He gestures toward the teacups. You look, sure enough, etched into the side of each cup is a tiny snail. One even has a little parasol. Historians still wonder who he was, Qin says. Some think he was a laborer. Others think he was a displaced poet who found a quieter audience. He picks up one of the cups and blows gently into it, as if that might reheat the tea through sheer determination. You can't stop people from creating. He says, even when you give them bricks instead of brushes. You lean back, letting the breeze press gently against your face. Down the wall, a small wooden box catches your eye. You walk over and open it. Inside is a collection of handwritten notes, each folded into a neat triangle. One reads, "Do not forget to dream, even when assigned to stair work." Another, "This stone has a view. Sit here if you're tired of pretending." A third simply says, "If you find my hat, it's yours now. It knows how to listen." Qin appears at your side, hands clasped behind his back. "I didn't approve the message box," he says quietly. "It just appeared one day." He reaches in and pulls out a final note, unfolds it, and reads, "If you're reading this, take a moment. Not everything needs fixing. Some things just need resting." He places it gently back inside. You both sit again on the edge of the wall. The moon glows low now, as if bowing toward the horizon. Qin sighs. "I spent so long trying to outlast time, but time just strolls along, sipping tea." You look at him. "Did the tea help?" He smiles faintly. "More than the walls did." He rises. "There's only one place left," he says. "The tomb." You rise too, brushing the dust from your sleeves. The wall stretches behind you, endless and proud. Ahead, the ground slopes downward, leading into a darkened valley. You begin walking. The cups remain behind, silent and watchful, still carrying the faint scent of lemon, tea, and unfinished thoughts. The descent from the wall is quieter than you expect. The wind hushes. The stone path tapers into a soft, packed trail lined with low grasses and nodding wildflowers, as if even nature is tiptoeing toward what lies ahead. Qin walks ahead with the kind of calm that feels like ritual. His hands are folded neatly in front of him, and for once his robes don't swish, they glide. The valley opens slowly. Hills pull back like curtains, revealing a wide basin flanked by cypress trees and blanketed in mist so low it hugs the earth like it's protecting something precious, or hiding something it's not sure you should see, and then you see it, a mound. Massive, quiet, familiar. It looks like a natural hill at first, until your eyes adjust, and you realize the curve is too smooth, the symmetry too perfect. This is the tomb, not just a grave, not merely a monument, a sealed thought, a buried sentence with no punctuation mark. You follow Qin as he steps onto a stone path lined with statues, less military than those in the garden, more contemplative. Philosophers, poets, scribblers, and dreamers, each gazing in a different direction, none quite meeting your eyes. "The scholars I silenced," Qin says softly. "I honored them here." He gestures to a statue near the edge. It's slightly crooked and its scroll is upside down. He argued that logic was overrated, said intuition was the real chariot of understanding. He sighs. "So naturally, I confiscated his chariot." You stifle a chuckle. He allows a small smile. The path curves inward toward a central stone plaza. In its center, a circular platform rises gently above the mist. It looks like a stage, or a whisper waiting to be spoken. You step onto it. The stone beneath your feet feels resonant, like it remembers things. "There's no entrance," you note. Qin nods. "I ordered the tomb to be sealed before I died." You look at him. "That's ambitious." I wanted to attend my own funeral in advance, he replies, to make sure no one improvised. You circle the platform slowly, no doorway, no seam. Just smooth stone, ancient and final. But underneath, he says, tapping the ground with his foot, there's an entire world, rivers of mercury, terracotta soldiers, models of cities, stars, and perhaps even regret. He sits on the edge of the platform, motioning for you to do the same. They say the rivers still flow, he adds, that the ceiling above them is studded with constellations and the floor mimics the shape of the empire. You glance at the stone, it doesn't shimmer, it doesn't pulse, but you swear you hear something faint, like the rustle of a page beneath the earth. Historians still debate what's really down there, Qin says. Some think it's just legend, others think it's too sacred to disturb. He gazes out at the mist. And some, he continues, believe that I buried not just my power, but my uncertainty. You sit quietly, trying to feel what the tomb feels. It's not sadness, not guilt, just a stillness deep enough to hum. Qin plucks a blade of grass and twirls it absently. I feared ideas more than armies, he says. But in the end, they outlasted me anyway. He looks at you. They always do. The wind picks up slightly. It carries the scent of something metallic and clean. Not blood, not war. Just time uncurled, unhurried, completely uninterested in your opinion. A flock of birds rises from the cypress trees, wheeling silently across the sky. Their wings make no sound, not even a flap. You lie back on the stone platform staring up. The stars are out now, not many. Just enough to remind you that above every empire, above every decree is sky. Qin lies beside you, not close, but not far. There's a legend, he says, that if you listen closely enough, the tomb will whisper its contents. You close your eyes and try, there's no voice, but there is an impression, like being in a library after everyone's gone. Like hearing someone turning pages in the room next to yours, you feel the presence of things unspoken. The weight of stored potential, ideas pressed into stone, hopes hidden beneath clay, and you wonder, what kind of man builds a tomb so vast that even his secrets feel immortal? Beside you, Qin exhales slowly. I thought building would keep me remembered, he says. But now I think forgetting is a kind of freedom. You don't reply, neither does the earth. The wind slows, the mist settles, the stars stay, and beneath it all the emperor rests, not in silence, not in shadow, but in the space between memory and maybe. And now everything softens. The stone beneath you feels warmer somehow, like it has absorbed the last few moments and decided to hold them for safekeeping. The air is still, wrapped in velvet hush. Even the stars seem less like distant suns and more like quiet lanterns, gently pulsing to the rhythm of your breath. You take in a slow inhale, steady and full. Exhale, there's no rush here, no urgency, no noise waiting on the other side of rest, just this moment, this cool, starlit stillness. This ancient landscape that has told you its secrets and now simply asks you to sleep. The emperor doesn't move. He lies beside you, gazing skyward, his hands resting calmly over his chest. He looks peaceful, not as a ruler or a builder or a man who once tried to shape every thought in the land, but as someone who, perhaps for the first time, has nothing left to do. In the distance, the garden is sleeping. The scrolls in the archive rest with their ribbons curled. The fire pit hums faintly, low and soft, like the purring breath of something that never needed to roar. The tea stations on the wall wait patiently for morning dew, and the pillows, even the strict embroidered ones, have gone quiet. You are not alone in your stillness. Every path you've walked tonight, the garden, the hallways, the tomb, has led you gently toward this, a quiet mind, a still body, a place where even ancient worries cannot follow. So rest now, let the thoughts drift without shape. Let your breath slow, like leaves settling in calm water. Let the shadows fade into sleep and let the hush hold you. You've journeyed far through memory and mist, through paper and stone, through echoes of fear and the warmth of stories that survived it all, and now there's nothing left to hold, only stillness, only sleep, only stars. End of script. Sweet dreams.